Archaeologists cracked open a 27,000-year-old coffin in the deserts of western China. Inside was a man, blue-eyed, about 45 years old. The man was buried with a harp and a set of horse bridles, and almost 2 pounds of marijuana that had somehow stayed green for 27 centuries in the ground. The tomb belonged to a shaman, and the marijuana was a going-away gift. The gentleman who packed this man made sure he'd have enough supplies for the other side. But he wasn't the first person to use this plant. The story starts about 12,000 years ago. Somewhere in East Asia, humans were just starting to figure out farming, and one of the first plants they looked at and thought, let's grow this. That plant was cannabis. Imagine being an ancient farmer and finding a plant that can be turned into rope, woven into clothes, eaten for food, pressed into oil, and used as medicine. That's not a crop. That's the ancient equivalent of finding a Swiss Army knife growing out of the ground. One of the earliest records of cannabis shows up in an ancient Chinese text called the Pen Tizao Qing, often described as one of the world's first medical handbooks, traditionally attributed to the legendary Emperor Shen Nong. The book recommended cannabis for everything from joint pain to malaria. From China, cannabis spread along the Silk Road. Merchants carried silk, spices, and apparently weed. One of those trade paths ran straight through the Pamir Mountains in Central Asia, and that's where the oldest proof of smoking turned up. High in those mountains, at a burial site called Jirzenkal Cemetery, researchers dug into 8 ancient tombs from around 500 BC. Inside, they found wooden braziers filled with charred stones that had been used to burn cannabis. And this wasn't just whatever grew on the hillside. This stuff was potent, way stronger than wild plants in the area. These people were choosing the strong stuff on purpose. They'd heat the stones, lay the cannabis on top, and everyone would breathe in the smoke together while they buried their dead. They were hotboxing funerals 2,500 years ago. Around that same period, a Greek historian named Herodotus was traveling through Central Asia and ran into a group of nomads called the Scythians. The Scythians were legendary warriors. They rode horses, carried bows, and apparently very enthusiastic about their smoke sessions. Herodotus watched them set up small tents, toss cannabis onto red-hot stones inside, and breathe in everything that came off. And Herodotus wrote the whole thing down, his exact words.
It smolders and sends forth such fumes that no Greek vapor bath could surpass it. The Scythians, delighted.
Is it just me? Or does he sound a little jealous? For a long time, historians figured he was exaggerating. Then in 1947, a Soviet archaeologist named Sergei Rudenko excavated frozen tombs in Siberia that had been sealed in permafrost for over 2,000 years. Inside, they found tent frames, heated stones, and cannabis seeds. Exactly what Herodotus described. He wasn't making anything up. Then, in 2013, another Scythian tomb turned up in the Caucasus Mountains with 7 pounds of solid gold cups inside. When they tested the residue inside those golden cups, they found cannabis and opium. Ancient warriors were mixing substances out of gold 2,400 years ago. Pretty fascinating, right? But 7 years later, they found something even stranger turned up at Tel Arad in Israel. Researchers examined altars from an ancient kingdom of Judah shrine, about 2,700 years old, and they found something interesting. One altar had frankincense, standard offering, but the other had cannabis, and they'd mixed it with animal dung to keep the burn slow enough to release the smoke properly, which means whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. And it wasn't just them. Every culture that came across this plant found a reason to keep it, because your body was already wired for it before you ever touched it. You naturally produce a molecule called anandamide, named after the Sanskrit word for bliss. Cannabis just happens to produce a chemical that fits into the exact same slot, like a spare key to a lock your body already had, which explains why halfway across the world in India they weren't just using it, they were worshipping it. India has been using cannabis longer than almost anyone. Their oldest sacred text, the Atharva Veda, lists cannabis as one of 5 sacred plants. Lord Shiva, one of the biggest gods in Hinduism, is called the Lord of Bhang, a drink made from cannabis leaves and milk. The story says after he swallowed a poison that could have ended the world, it was bhang that brought him back to calm. People still make the same drink during Holi and Shivaratri almost 3,000 years later. But India wasn't the end of the story. This plant kept moving. In China, around 200 AD, a physician